I don't know, I think that everybody kind of read this article, this paper by Jamie Peck, where he argues that austerity, urban austerity is also kind of a multi-scalar issue, that it is an issue which goes down on different scales, coming from top scales, national scales, subnational scales, regional scales to urban scales, and that they are in a way interconnected. And so what we try is to present this multi-scalar issue in this session, and I will start by talking about the more national issues here. So Peck argues that there is what he calls a high politics of austerity, and for the US case he says this is the issue of the Washington theater about debt ceiling and so on and so forth, the deficit cliff, which was in the media like I think 2 or 3 months ago. And that at the other side there's what he calls the politics of everyday austerity at the street level, where the effects of public service cutbacks, job losses and increased exposure to socioeconomic risks are experienced in daily life in workplaces, households and the public sphere, which seems pretty close to what Dina presented for the Quick case before. So while Felix will focus more on the urban scale, what is going on the urban scale, I will focus on the high politics of austerity in Germany. So what I want to discuss is the fiscal governance. This is the idea that it is about the budget of the state, the household of the state, so it is about public debt. And I think this is very central and important to the question of austerity, because the state's budget is more or less about the economic form of how states work. So what is going on in the state's budget in the end will trickle down to different areas of policies, be it infrastructure policies, be it social policies, be it policies of education and so on and so forth. So if you change how the state's budget is supposed to work, you change how all these different things work in the end. So to start, I will start in the 60s. So this is a pretty long time ago, but I think it is important to understand in order to change the changes of the last years. In 1967 until 69, there was a reform in Germany which was called the Grand Financial Reform. And the core of this reform was what was called later the Keynesianization of fiscal politics. So before the state, the German state wasn't allowed to borrow anything. So they were not allowed to have debt at all. There were some small debt kinds, but at all they were not allowed to borrow. So what they did in 69 until 69, they changed this, and they changed it much to the Keynesian model. So the idea that the economy as a whole is not stable, it is unstable, and in order to stabilize it, you have to borrow. You have to indebt the state to actually flatten out the cyclical movement of the economy. So this is what they did in 69, and obviously this is the fiscal base for the social welfare state in Germany. So this was very important back then. I mean, obviously some years later there was the crisis of Fordism, and connected to that also a crisis of the fiscal budget of the state. So, and this happened on different scales. It happened on the national scale, and you had even back in 75, at the end of the 1970s, the first round of austerity measures in Germany. I don't want to go into detail what happened then. And it also trickled down back then to the urban scale. So at the end of the 70s, at the beginning of the 80s, you find in urban politics this change towards entrepreneurial politics. You find what Jamie Peck calls scalar damping, that responsibilities are passed from the national scale to the urban scale. So this is a pretty old movement. So the next important step is on another scale. It is the Treaty of Maastricht, and I guess this is nowadays pretty common knowledge. So these convergence criteria were introduced in 1992 at the European scale. And the idea was that states are not allowed to indebt as they wanted any longer, but they have to apply to these kinds of criteria. So this is like the 3% of GDP you are allowed to have deficit per year, and this is the 60% debt quota compared to GDP you are allowed to have at all. So this is like the framework for the European states since 1992. This kind of central piece was further worked out in 1997 with the Stability and Growth Pact. Actually, it's not a Growth Pact, actually it's just a Stability Pact, which is pretty much about making sure that these kinds of criteria are fulfilled for the next years. So the system kind of went into a crisis beginning in 2002. And the crisis was that especially Germany and France actually didn't meet this criteria any longer. So the deficit of Germany and France was much higher. It was about like 4.5% in the years from 2002 and 2005. So it proved that it actually did not function as it was supposed to function. And it also showed that like the legal idea how this was supposed to work did not work, because obviously the strong European states, Germany and France, were able to move beyond this kind of growth pact, stability pact, by means of political pressure. So this was the crisis. Right after that, the global crisis hit, the financial and economic crisis. And parallel to that development, something happened in Germany, which is this debt brake, which was introduced in 2009. There was a commission which started out in 2007, and so the idea is, and this is very important because actually the German debt brake is a model for the European debt brake we see nowadays, which is also applied to other countries in Europe. So the idea is that the federal state in Germany is nowadays only allowed to borrow 0.35% compared to GDP per year, so the deficit should not go higher. So as you can see, it's considerably below the 3% of the Maastricht Treaty. So we see like a narrowing of the possibility for the states to get deficits. And for the Bundesländer, which is like a subnational scale, it is like the states probably in the US. They won't be allowed to take any deficit at all beginning in 2020. So for the federal state it starts in 2016. For the Bundesländer it starts in 2020. So you can see there's a massive change from this idea of Keynesian politics that states have to actually use debt in order to counter a cyclical, unstable economy. To this new kind of more or less neoclassical politics, monetarist politics. So this was Germany in 2009. The process again changed the scales, and it came back to the European scale in 2010 with a reform of the so-called new economic governance, which was several secondary legislations by the European Commission, which actually was used, the intention was to make sure that the crisis states in the Eurozone have to actually stick to this 3% measure. So this was the idea of the new economic governance, and there are all kinds of sanctions connected to this. There's a new kind of monitoring, there's a new kind of how sanctions are imposed. They're less, I mean, they're in a way more authoritarian. I will speak about that in a minute. And the final stuff, what happened is in 2012, the so-called fiscal compact. You probably all heard of that, but just to make sure that we know what we talk about is the idea that the German debt brake has to be Europeanized, that it has to be applied to all countries around Europe. And so the criteria here is that you are allowed as a member state to indebt yourself by maximum 0.5% compared to GDP per year. So, to make sure, you can see this decrease. We had like 3% with the Treaty of Maastricht, which was even worse than the Keynesian form of fiscal policy. And now we have even less possibilities to indebt the states. So this is like the development. Just to put it here on the slide, I don't want to talk about this. This in a way trickles down to the urban scale, but Felix will talk about that in his presentation, so I don't want to talk about it. So going on from this like empirical, what is going on empirical in the field, I asked myself in a way, so what is the political content of these kinds of reforms? And I think there are three aspects. So the first I want to talk about is connecting with Stephen Gill, he had this term of neoconstitutionalism. We find the constitutionalization of austere neoliberalism. This means there's a lock-in of austere politics, lock-in by the kind of law. So the idea is that you actually write a policy into law and thereby make sure that it that you can't go over it in the next election term or whatever, but that it stretches out for a longer time. So this is the idea of constitutionalization, and I think this is pretty good said by Angela Merkel herself. I translated it. I hope you can understand it. So she said, I mean, in Germany, we wrote a debt brake into the constitution because obviously we didn't trust ourselves completely, and we said that we want to make sure, once and for all, that there won't be again an excuse in the form of an election campaign or an exceptional situation. So this is the idea. Yeah? So there's no exception from this, and it is nothing else we are doing in Europe now. So this is the Europeanization of the debt brake by means of the fiscal compact. So making sure that austerity sticks there like forever. So and the Corporate European Observatory therefore used the title for a paper. It's basically about austerity forever. So I think this is the first cornerstone of this new fiscal framework. The next point is that we can actually see in a situation of crumbling hegemony. I mean, with the crisis, also the idea that there are like material gains for the marginalized, for the working classes, whatever. They are breaking. So, I mean, Dina had these figures in her presentation. You see, like the wages are dropping and so on and so forth. So, and there you can't organize hegemony for European politics any longer. So in this situation, what happens is that we have more authoritarian solutions, and you can see it in different things in these kinds of European policies. You have on the one hand a upgrading of the executives, which would be the European Commission, but also national executives via the parliaments. So you have a anti-democratic bias built into it. You have within the state apparatuses, you have an upgrading of the strongholds of financial capital, and you have an upgrading of supranational institutions and their selectivities via national parliaments. So this all combines to like an authoritarianization of the whole system. You can also see it, the fiscal compact is in a legal sense very much problematic because it should be written into European law, but actually it is set up as international law, and this is like going around the usual form how European law works. So this adds to this anti-democratic authoritarian direction which is built into it. So on the third point, this is like the more or less geographic dimension to is the what I would call scalar flexibilization. So this is a quote from Lukas Oberndorf. It's pretty lengthy, but I think it brings interesting things to the point. He says, this new determinant aims, so he's talking about the new economic governance, aims to further flexibilize the connections between the scales and levels of the European ensemble of state apparatuses. The objective is to enable dominant state apparatuses and the factions inscribed into them to utilize and rearrange those levels in the most effective manner and thus to pursue their interests more easily. opposition by the subaltern can thus be variably countered through either a, and this inception is on mine, European Council recommendation measures by their own respective national or subnational governments, a mission from the European Commission and the interiorized administrator of the ensemble as a whole, or skipping institutional mediation altogether, a direct threat from the global financial markets in the form of announcing a credit rating downgrade, whatever happens to be strategically expedient. So it is about using the scalar regime in the most effective way in the interest of capital. This is what this new regime of fiscal governance looks like. So I think these are three very important cornerstones. So in this paper, Peck goes on to argue that these high politics of austerity eventually trickle down. And so I thought, let's see whether we can find this in the German case. I didn't do research on it, but I think I found some stuff. Maybe Felix can add to this later. So I think the threat definitely exists. We can't say right now whether it really is like material or not, but I think the threat exists. So the Assembly of German Cities, which is like very important in Germany, said that the cities can't accept that the Länder, so the Bundesländer, simply try to pass the consolidation pressure induced by the debt breakdown to the municipalities. So they think that this will happen in a way. So and they are trying to actually campaign against this kind of scalar damping of the responsibilities and the pressures induced by austerity down to the municipal level. And in a study of, interestingly enough, the Commerzbank, you can see even German financial capital looks at this kind of process, so it seems to be important for them. So they asked different municipalities what they think will happen with debt breaks, and they said, we suspect that there will be a passing of responsibilities from federal state and Bundesländer to municipalities without sufficient funding. They thought what will happen are cuts in the financial compensation mechanisms which are set up within the Bundesländer, and they fear that cuts in municipal investments by the Länder will happen. So, as I said, we can say, at least I can say, maybe you can, I don't know, in the current situation whether this really happens, but at least there's the threat that this will happen, that there will happen a scalar damping of austerity down to the urban level. So on the remainder of the presentation I will want to do two things. The first is to put an outlook on the fiscal governance of the future in Germany. And so as a starting point, I took the coalition agreement of the grand coalition which was established some days ago, which was agreed on. Actually, they're not moving right now, but they said, on the one hand, what we won't do within the next period of government, we won't raise any taxes. So they say, still we keep the level, which is this neoliberal idea of keeping the taxes the same, not raising it in order to not to pressurize growth, but to keep the taxes the same. At the same time, they say we want to keep, or we want to make sure that in the future the budgets are sustainably balanced, and they are planning to reduce the debt quota, which is right now at 83% for the German state, back to 70% until 2017. So I think if you can't consolidate by raising taxes, if you can't get more money actually out of the economy, but you want to stick to these goals, it is clear that you will have austerity pressures in the next years. This is what they agreed on in this coalition agreement. So this is the first point. And the second point is that the current form of financial federalism in Germany will run out at the end of the decade. There won't be agreements on how finances are distributed spatially across Germany will run out, and all kinds of stuff. So basically, right now there is this target window for reforming the whole fiscal governance of Germany further under the idea of debt breaks. And you can see that all kinds like Bertelsmann Stiftung or the neoliberal think tanks are already in position there. They wrote like papers what we should do, and so what they aim at in the end is, I think, we have the prospect of a turn towards more competitive federalism, so putting subnational territories in competition to each other, and we have the outlook of a further lock-in of austerity at all scales. And I think you can find it a little bit in the coalition agreement, because what they want to do is the compliance with the fiscal compact, which will mean that the municipalities will be part of this debt breaks. And they want to reorder the spatial redistribution policies, which will probably mean, on the one hand, consolidation of the uneven state we have right now in Germany. Felix will talk a little bit about it. And again, trying to put forward a more competitive system of federalism. So, to finish up, and I thought it might be interesting to put, at least for discussion, the idea what can we do about it, or what might be options we have to think about. I have to be a little bit careful with this slide. I don't want to offer like the final solution or whatever. It's just ideas what might be interesting, what is in the debate right now. So I think the central thing would be actually to politicize debt, and this is very much for the German case. I guess in Greece it's completely different. I think debt is politicized in Greece, but in Germany it's more or less simply economic discussion. So it is about, you know, the future of our child. They, if we take debts today, they will have to pay the taxes and so on and so forth. So it's not about thinking about what are the effects of this kind of balanced households and so on and so forth. So I think in Germany it is very important to really politicize debt, to take it out of the purely economic realm. And there might be like 3 options, I thought, which are interesting to think about. So the first would be to actually use the debt breaks. I mean, they exist, the debt breaks. We have to live with that. But actually to put them to like a creative use. So what the neoliberal policy is, to actually do consolidation on the side of the spending, to cut social spendings, to cut spendings for education and so on and so forth, we know that. But actually, I mean, you can also consolidate a state's budget by raising the taxes, by taxing wealth and so on and so forth. And so this would, I think this would be a very interesting option, because it also puts to the table, you know, the whole idea how is wealth distributed within the society and so on and so forth. So if you say we have like expenditures which are important for our communities, we have to make sure that they are funded in a way. So we have to tax. And there is this in Germany. There's this campaign, Umverteilen, Reichtum besteuern, which would be like fair redistribution, tax wealth. It was set up especially by the unions and other parts of the left opposition in Germany. So this is like connected to this idea of using the debt breaks in a creative way. So a second option might be the idea of debt audits. This doesn't exist too much in Germany. I think it is stronger in Greece, in southern countries. It exists in Spain. There's a big network about this, and it exists, for example, in Belgium, but it doesn't exist right now in Germany. The idea would be to what they put forward, to think about what are legitimate debts and what are illegitimate debts. And I think there are several problems connected to that. Maybe we can discuss about it. But I think for the German case, it would work especially at the local scale. So if you can say, I don't know, like urban match projects or whatever. I mean, they are not for the general public. They are actually for entrepreneurial policies or whatever. You could actually say, if they are debt funded, we don't think that this is a legitimate use of money for urban communities. So this would be an option for the local scales. And as a more general idea would be, I think, actually connecting the discourses and campaigns around the idea of the right to the city and anti-austerity discourses and actions. And I think right now this connection doesn't exist. But I think if you ask yourself how the right to the city has to be funded, which would be, or what the economic form of the right to the city would be, you get the direct connection to anti-austerity campaigns. Maybe. So, but as I said, this is more or less an attempt to put this on the discussion, and I would be very happy if you could discuss this later on. Okay, so thank you. This would be my presentation.